Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is the top 100 games of all time as of 2023. We're going through 30 to 21 today. We're down to the last third over here, the best possible 30 games ever, the 5 to 5s, the incredible games. On every single game on this list is an absolute banger, at least for me. That's the nature of the way these lists work. And if you want to go ahead and see how I put together these lists, any 3 minutes of notes around what I did, all that, that's going to be at the very beginning of the very first video in the series, numbers 100 through 91, I guess. Additionally, before we start this, just a note that throughout the course of this top 100, I am running a support drive for the channel. You can go ahead and check out that video down below. I'll link to that as well, where there's an opportunity to go ahead and win 3 all-ins for Oathsworn, for Master Universe, and for Zombicide, Undead or Alive. No purchase even necessary for that. You can go ahead and just comment that's eligible, or you could also become a Patreon, Ko-Fi member, all of those things as well to help out the channel. But with that, let's go ahead and start this off with number 30, and timestamps, of course, to everything down below. But number 30 is one that has risen through the ranks for me. This is The Loop from Pandasaurus Games, a game that continuously gets better every single time I play this, and the game that I have all the expansions for, all these scenarios, all these different ways to play through this cooperative experience. Because The Loop is a cooperative experience, or a solo experience for those so inclined, but the general idea is you're trying to accomplish a scenario, trying to accomplish a bunch of missions while you face off against any number of different scenarios that are going to have different things being thrown at you, or different challenges to overcome past the vanilla base game experience. You're going to have cubes dropping out of this tower as it slowly turns around, being mindful of accomplishing different missions that are going to be out at any given time, trying to specifically jump through certain hoops. Meanwhile, you're going to be deck building, gathering more cards from different zones to be able to add to your cards so you can activate cards, and then activating the loop. The core concept in the game is the idea of the loop, that you can spend resources, energy, to loop yourself and then be able to use cards again and again and again, and depending how you time it, you might be able to have really efficient turns where you use tons of cards, spending more and more energy each time, while trying to accomplish your goals and stay one step ahead of Dr. Foe? Dr. Foe, that's his name. The expansions come with a bunch more characters, a bunch more scenarios, but the game gives you a tight cooperative experience. This is one of my favorite go-to basic cooperative games in which, you do good things, game does bad things, rinse and repeat until someone wins. And one of the reasons is the clean gameplay, the scenarios keep it interesting, the difficulty variation is just a ton. There's a lot of, the basic entry mode to the game is a challenge, and the ways to make it progressively more and more difficult. There's just a ton of variety and a ton of hard decisions mixed into this experience. That's The Loop from Pandasaurus Games. My number 29 is going to be, my number 29 over here is Aquatica. Aquatica from Arcane Wonders from Cosmodrome Games. Aquatica with the expansion, I should note, but Aquatica is one that I want to say I found this game in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's a 2019 title originally. The expansion came out, Cold Waters, I believe it was. I think that came out maybe 2020, 2021. But Aquatica gives you hand management. It's one of those games where you're going to start with a basic hand of cards, and then as you play cards to take certain preset actions, eventually you can go ahead and get all your cards back, and so you're trying to be mindful of that pacing. It's a system you've seen in many games, from Century Spice Road to Concordia and many, many more. And Aquatica just has you going for a bunch of small little things, but the core concept of this game, one of the things that makes this game interesting, is the way you're going to be sliding cards into your player board. You have these little recessed player boards over here, you're gathering cards, either purchasing or military conquests from this board over here, sliding them up over here, and that's how you're going to spend extra resources or military might, because you don't actually have resources in the game. Rather, you take a basic action with a card, but then you go ahead and utilize extra, the various, I can't remember what they're called, the Stingrays. You have the Stingrays over there, but also you have the cards themselves that you're going to be sliding up as you have them. So you conquer a kingdom, but then you can start slowly milking that kingdom for its resources, but being mindful of the timing and eventually trying to score that kingdom. The game moves fast. It gives you a lot of things to consider. The expansion gives you more ways to score and run that end game differently, which I think really adds to the experience. But overall, Aquatica gives me a fast-moving game, a 45-minute gameplay with a ton of decision space and a lot of things to consider as you try to think through the best way to build your hand, manage your resources, and take down the well, I guess your opponents. There's no enemy. This is not cooperative. This is a competitive game. Coming in at number 28, and this one is new to the list. There's only a handful of new games in my top 30 games of all time, but this is one of them, and this is probably the most recent. In fact, I think this is the most recent new game to the list. On the entire top 100, this is the most recent new one. That's going to be Sankore from Osprey Games. Sankore, from the designers of Merv, well, one of the designers of Merv and then another designer as well. This is a meaty, heavy Euro game that's going to give you a ton ton of things to consider while theming itself as an educational school. I think it's a school. It seems to be a school. There's lots of books and research and, you know, philosophy and law and all these astronomy, all these various subjects you're trying to learn. But basically, in the game, you're running a little school. You're going to have students you can recruit. Those students are going to go into your school, and then they're slowly going to take classes to move up through the school. But the classes are effectively different areas of the game board. There's 4 different areas of the game board, all giving you a bit of an area control puzzle. You're going to have this as your center game board over here. You're going to have the top area here, down here, here, and here as the 4 main areas. This is going to be a separate area. You can go ahead and retire students effectively. They can graduate. Students don't retire, let's be honest. They graduate in the game. But meanwhile, you're trying to be mindful of the fact that there's going to be this book track over here. As you spend resources in the game, it goes into the book track, which determines the value of each of those 4 schools and how your things are going to be worth points in the game, because you're gathering these tokens in the game, but the tokens can be worth as few as 0 points or as many as, I think the absolute maximum would be 9 points, but that would be pretty extreme. But between 0 and 9 points per token you gather, so you're trying to figure out which of these tokens of which schools of knowledge are you trying to invest in, and how are you making sure to stack that shared library so it reflects the points you want to get out of the experience. Every single action you take in the game cascades in multiple ways. Every single thing you do has multiple impacts. Every single turn, you are presented with several things, 5, 6, 7 different options, all of which are incredibly compelling, and you're trying to choose not just which action you're taking, but which action inherently is now available for your opponents to take, because if there's 6 juicy options on the table and you only take one of them, well, that leaves 5 others for your opponent. And even that 6th one that you did take may create new opportunities for that next player. And so it constantly feels like that tension, the tension of a good drafting game, is present in Sankore, where you're looking at a hand of cards and choosing one for yourself, but also choosing the options to pass to your opponent. That happens with every single play over here. It's just happening with the actions instead of actual cards. There's a lot to consider. You start with your hand with a hand of 4 cards that are going to be from a large pool of cards. You're going to start with 4 variable bonuses that you can slowly unlock, which drive your engine in different ways. Meanwhile, the core action economy of the game and the way the game state is going to be laid out means every single game is going to be a slightly different version of how to most efficiently try to get as many points as possible across the rounds of play. That's going to be Sankore, a delightful Eurogame, one of the more meaty Eurogame experiences I've had in recent years, that both gives me a lot of fun things to do, makes me work hard for the resources to do even more fun things, but never leaves me feeling starved, but always leaves me feeling with a hard choice in front of me. That's going to be Sankore, the pride of Mansa Musa from Osprey Games. My number 27. My number 27 is an abstract game, the highest rated abstract game in my collection, and that's going to be Tak. Tak is delightful. This is from a book. It's from the In the Name of the Wind. I want to say Patrick Rothfuss In the Name of the Wind. It's a game from a book. Thematically speaking, this game is referenced in that series, and he reached out to James Ernest and decided to design the game around this core concept that was in a book. So this over here, Tak, one of my favorite abstracts of all time, one of the better abstracts out there. This is all based on an idea from an actual book. So that's pretty mind-blowing, because usually those kinds of things don't do that great. But Tak is a quick and clean abstract. This game plays in 8 to 10 minute rounds. You can have rounds that drag if you have really heavily competitive players who really are on top of their game. But I'd say a typical game is anywhere between 5 to 15 minutes to knock out a game of this. But you're basically going to sit down and start placing pieces in order to connect your sides of the board. That's all you're trying to do. You're trying to connect any 2 sides of the board. I said your sides, but really any 2 sides that are opposite each other. That's all you're doing. All you do is that, and then you win. But you start the game off with a very basic mode on a 3x3 board, then you expand to a 4x4, then you start adding rules and pieces, and there's not a ton of rules by the time you're done with it. By the time you're done the basic, most common game, you're going to be playing on a 5x5 grid with, blocking stones and capstones, and there's just those 3 basic pieces you have. A flat, a blocking stone, which has a different term for it, and then a capstone. Those 3 basic pieces are going to define how you play through the game and how you try to stay one step ahead of your opponent, as they are frequently placing pieces on top of stacks and then moving and dropping the entire stack off along the way. There's so many things to consider in a game that has so light on rules. Tak gives me a delightful experience every single time I play it. This is one that I've been hunting for a while for a deluxe version of Tak, but I can't find any that actually, well, frankly, look good enough. I think the basic game as is actually looks pretty amazing, but it's one of those ones where every few months I'll pop on Etsy and try to see if there's a deluxeified Tak experience that's worth paying for, because I'll pay for this. If you know someone who makes good Tak sets, let me know, because this is one of my favorite games. My number 26, I think 26, my number 26 game of all time was a little higher last year. It's dropped a few spots, but I mean, it's number 26. This is like I said already, every single game on this list is a banger. But we have number 26, which is Mind Management from Off the Page Games. Mind Management, one of the best, not one of the best hidden movement game in my collection. This one continuously holds up and ranks above all others. I think my other hidden movement games in my top 100 are going to be Beast, which frequently comes close to Mind Management, but ultimately I find the simplicity of Mind Management always has it one step ahead. And then a new addition to the list is going to be Run from Fowers Games, which is high up in the top 100 because while it does have even more simplicity than Mind Management, it doesn't have the level of depth that Mind Management brings to the table. So, you know, we have two games, one a little simpler, one a little bit more complicated, and we have Mind Management exactly in the middle where it continuously holds this top spot just because of how good, clean this hidden movement game is. In the game, you're going to have one player playing as the hidden movement player. I always forget. There's like the recruiter, the agents, which always to me sounds like they're on the same page, but I don't think they're on the same team. But you have the recruiter who's wandering around this board over here. And this is all based on a comic, by the way, Off the Page Games. What they do is they do games based on comics. They have Heroes County, and then upcoming they're going to have... I don't remember what it's called. It's called, oh my gosh, I don't remember what it's called. They have another game coming up, like, based on cryptids and something county. I don't remember. But they have another game coming up. They have some fantastic games. But Mind Management over here, you're going to have this map over here that you're wandering around on. You know, you're going to have 4 agents. You're going to have the recruiter who's trying to stay hidden. You can only ever go to one spot, each spot on the board, once per game, which results in an interesting puzzle that if I know you've been here, I also know that you can't come back here, which affects how I interact with that spot and with the entire board in general. It means that the agents have enough room. The recruiter has enough room to stay secret. The agents have enough room to try to just get a little bit ahead of the recruiter, to try to be able to loop them in and narrow them and slowly enclose them on the board. The game starts with the recruiter feeling completely in control, the agents feeling completely lost. But by the time you get to the end game, it's the recruiter who's feeling cornered, the agents who are feeling like they're slowly stepping in, and then ultimately it comes down to who manages to just persevere or drop better than the other players as they try to work their way towards victory. Mind Management is absolutely amazing. My number 26 game of all time, a delightful hidden movement game with a lot of things to consider. A basic mode that is good, and then an advanced mode that is kind of weird, honestly, but ultimately works and does the job and ends up being a delightful hidden movement game. This game works well as a 2-player game, works well as a 3 and 4-player game. 5, I think, is pushing it. Honestly, 2 and 3 is probably my favorite player count. And there is a solo mode as well, if that's to your fancy. They have an app that's going to run the other side for you, and that is worth playing. I've played through that. I find it is a good experience. I do still prefer it at 2 and 3 players. That's going to be Mind Management, my number 26 game of all time. My number 25 is going to be Spirit Island, which I believe has been in my top 100 since I discovered this game. But Spirit Island from Greater Than Games continuously gives me delightful cooperative experiences. Now, this one has ranged where it is in my top 100. It's been, I believe, as high as, it may have been number 10 one year, I think, or somewhere there. It's been high up on the list, but it's bounced around a bit because every year I have a different level of experience with the game. Which expansions I've played, how often I've played it, but it does give you a delightful cooperative experience that has a ton of variety to it, a ton of difficulty modifications. It constantly makes me feel like I'm going to lose, even though I'm usually in control and can actually win, and I like that. I don't actually like losing games. I like winning, so sue me. I do enjoy winning, but I like the tension of feeling like I have to execute as perfectly as possible. Like I have to get everything right to be able to win. I like feeling the pressure. And one of the things that Spirit Island does great is it makes it feel the pressure every single game. Every single time I play this game, I feel like I'm going to lose. I feel like I have to struggle to win, even though I'm usually in control. And so usually, win after win, I slowly start tempering up the various modifications for whatever scenario I'm in and start trying to experiment with different things, possibly adding more expansions. I still have not played with all the expansions. I got the Nature Incarnate expansion and I haven't touched it. I don't even know if I've opened it. I haven't felt the need to because I have Spirit Island content. I mean, don't get me wrong. If there's another option to get more Spirit Island content, I will still get it because this game is fantastic. But Spirit Island is a cooperative game where you're taking control of a spirit. You're using powers and abilities galore to be able to take down the various, settlers on the island. You're going to start with a preset hand of cards reflecting that spirit's powers. You're going to be drafting from major and minor powers over here. You're going to have, your spirits over here. You're going to have major and minor powers you're going to be adding to your hand that are going to give you more tools to be able to take down the enemy. You're going to have various blight cards that are going to reflect the different challenges you're facing off. You'll have various scenario modifications to reflect the different challenges you're taking on. There's so many different aspects to this game that are going to be mixed up. You will never play the same game twice, and you have so many opportunities for spirits, whether you're playing a solo spirit, whether you're playing, 3 or 4 spirits, and that could depend on player count. It could depend on, spirit count. You could be playing a solo game with 3 different spirits, which is a lot to manage, but is doable. You could be playing a 2-player game with 2 spirits each. Again, honestly, a lot to manage. Any single spirit on their own is a lot to manage. My personal preference is playing a 2 or 3 player game or playing a solo game controlling 2 spirits. That's my personal preference. I like the 1 spirit challenge a lot, but I find ultimately it doesn't have the interaction that makes every game as unique, meaning every spirit playing every spirit on its own is one thing, versus the combinations of any 2 spirits gives you so many rooms to explore different ways that those spirits will bounce off each other and build off each other, because every spirit is completely custom from their starting cards to their actual powers baked into the player board. And they all have different aspects of, are you more defense oriented, more attack oriented, more manipulation or fear oriented. They all have their different tools and resources, but ultimately Spirit Island is it's powers and abilities, the board game in a cooperative mode, and I like it because that's kind of my jam. Number 24 on the list is arguably, I have to go through my entire list over here, but it's arguably the oldest game on my list based on just the date of when that game came out. Not the date of my collection, not my oldest game, but it is arguably the oldest game on the list, and that is going to be El Grande Big Box. And I'd say El Grande is the oldest game on the list. El Grande Big Box came out a few years later, but that basically is the idea of this. El Grande over here, which I believe is finally due for a reprint. I believe Lucky Duck Games is coming out with a reprint on this game, if I'm not mistaken, but I've had this big box for a long time because I found this game, I don't even know when I found it, but El Grande, well, let's go through some backstory over here. El Grande is a game that's one of the oldies and goodies in the board game space. The nature of me entering the hobby in 2011, 2012 meant that many of the older games, I think this is a 1995 title, meant that many of the older games I didn't necessarily dive into, because some of them people talk about, some not as much. And for me, I played a game called Londonderry and Borderlands. Londonderry and Borderlands, I played that game a very long time ago from Mercury Games, a startup Canadian publisher that unfortunately didn't go anywhere. They had a few games, they kind of went solvent as a company or something, I don't know what happened. They disappeared. But that Londonderry and Borderlands had art from KTBG, from Josh from KTBG. It had or Burnt Island Games. It had that artist or whatever behind it, Josh Capel. But it basically, it was a delightful experience in which you had maybe 14 choices across the entire game, and it all came down to a degree of area control, manipulation, and management. I want to say it was designed by, I keep pausing as I try to reflect on like just reality in general. I want to say it was designed by Daryl Andrews. I think. I'm pretty sure. Maybe. But I played that game, and I really, really liked it. I loved it. I fell in love with it. I thought it was so incredible what you did with so few actions and the degree of area control, and it was excellent. And then I played it with a friend, and Daryl, sorry if you're watching this video, but I played it with a friend who said, he said he'd rather poke his eyes out than play the game again, which frankly was shocking to me. We're in story time. We're in full-on story time over here. Frankly, that was a little shocking to me because I love the game, and I love the game, but he basically had all these complaints about it. But his biggest thing was that he said it felt like El Grande, but not as good. That was the thing. So again, Daryl, if you are watching this, I love the game. It's not my fault. Blame my friend. He's the one who said the mean things about the game. But ultimately, that's where we ended up. But the thing that was interesting to me is my friend said it felt like El Grande, but he liked El Grande better. For whatever reason, he had issues with this game. Different conversation. But he compared those two games. And so I made that my mission to go ahead and hunt down El Grande and try it out. Because if my friend would rather poke out his eye with a fork than play this game again, and because it felt like an inferior version of El Grande, well, I had to try El Grande. And so I got El Grande. Daryl, stop watching this video at this point now. But I got El Grande, and at that point, after playing El Grande, I got rid of Londonderry and Borderlands, because I thought it was the walled city, Londonderry and Borderlands. I got rid of it at that point because I still liked the game, to be clear, but I just did think El Grande was a better version of that game. There were some small nitpicks I had with the walled city that I didn't find as present in El Grande. That's kind of how we're here. So, story time's over. We're back to El Grande. El Grande is incredible. Oh, fun fact, by the way, I think walled city plays better at lower player counts. El Grande's best at 5, so there is that trade-off too. Anyways, check out the Walled City. If you haven't heard of it or whatever, check it out. It's a good game. I think it's a really good game. Granted, I think El Grande is better, but El Grande is an area control game that plays across 9 rounds. In those 9 rounds, you're trying to place various meeples down to various regions, but you're also taking abilities. Every time you draft a card, you're drafting a degree of number power of how many meeples are going out on the board, but also which ability you are taking. And the problem is, just like I mentioned earlier in Sankore, where every single time there's multiple ideal actions in front of you, but the actions you choose are not just about what you choose, but about what you leave for your opponent. That is present in El Grande. Every round you're going to look at 4 different abilities that can hurt you, 5 different abilities that can hurt you in different ways as you go through it. And you're trying to figure out what is the best thing for you, what are your opponents going to choose, what is the best circumstance on the board that you can navigate, and then you're trying to play your auction cards, your bidding cards, to try to wrest control of the turn order to lock in your choices, which is an own entirely separate minigame that feeds into the game system. Meanwhile, you're playing an entire area control puzzle where you try to spread off. Let me see if I can show you this over here. You're trying to play an entire area control puzzle where you're trying to spread across this map over over here. You're dropping meeples onto the board. You can never affect where the king is, and the king is going to be a key thing that moves around every round, but you can never actually touch the king itself, and you can only place next to the king, so these regions are also all safe. But meanwhile, you also have this Casio over here where you're dropping meeples, and these meeples over here will drop out before every single scoring round, will drop out onto the board to be able to go ahead and spread, which lends itself to 9 rounds of choices, 9 rounds of decisions, a ton of nuance to the gameplay, a ton of decisions based as far as how you're going to make things score, and a ton of control and also lack of control as you mess with others and they mess with you. It is one of the best, if not the best, 5-player game I have in my collection. It does play well at 4. It arguably plays well at 3 too. For me, this is a game I pull out when I have 5 players because it's just such a good 5-player game. That's going to be El Grande, the big box. I've only played through like maybe one of the modules in this big box, like the base game, and then like maybe one module. I have not felt the need to dive into more because, well, it's just that good of a game. That's going to be El Grande, my number 24 game of all time. My number 23 game of all time is going to be more of an entire category, and that specific category is going to be the Zombicide category, but reflected with Marvel Zombies as my current favorite in that genre. You see, Zombicide has a bunch of games, and to be very clear, when I put this as a category, I should be specific. I think Zombicide 2nd Edition is way too easy. I think Zombicide Invader is very charming and compelling, but also too easy. I think that Zombicide Night of the Living Dead is too easy. What other Zombicides am I missing? Zombicide 1, 2, and 3, Season 1, 2, and 3, the originals, never really dove into quite as much. By the time I got into Zombicide, I was already past them. I tried briefly getting into them. It wasn't interested enough to really be able to critically analyze them that much. So for me, I think the Zombicides, when I talk about how I love Zombicide, when I talk about Zombicide as a system, to be most specific, I think Zombicide Black Plague and Zombicide Black Plague and Marvel Zombies, I think, are the best within that system. They're neck and neck. Arguably, Marvel Zombies is a drop ahead for me, arguably, but that is a much more nuanced conversation around the nature of me preferring the Marvel Zombies system, but me still loving the variety that Black Plague brings to your table as far as zombie types, which Marvel Zombies still fails to do. This is a longer, separate conversation around all the Zombicides, but I guess my overall point is my best Zombicides are Marvel Zombies and then Zombicide Black Plague. Those include this Zombicide Deceased, as well as Zombicide Green Horde at the same time. I haven't played White Death, so I can't comment on that. And the Zombicide Undead or Alive, I think, is very, 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 very good. It loses a few points in theme compared to the rest of them. The theme of just cowboys is not as appealing as these other games, but there's still a lot of good things to be said about that one, and honestly, I'd keep that one, except for the fact that I have too much Zombicide. Anyways, Marvel Zombies. This Marvel Zombies, the Zombicide system in general, this is my number 23 game of all time, and that's because it gives you so much fun. It gives you boxes full of miniatures, which is good if there's a good game behind it, not so great if there's not a good game behind it, but there is a good game behind it, at least in my opinion. This makes, by the way, 7 or 8 as far as the command games in my collection, in my top 100 so far, so we're doing pretty good over there. But anyways, this is going to have you playing as a bunch of hero survivors or whatnot. Or if you're playing as Marvel Zombies, you could be playing as zombie survivors. Anyways, you're playing as a bunch of characters who are going to be taking down hordes of enemies who are marching your way, but then also stronger enemies that you eventually have to take down. And again, every system is going to be a little different. You have the Abominations in Black Plague, you have the heroes or the undead heroes in Marvel Zombies, different nuances to the system, but ultimately the main goal of the game is level up your character, unlock abilities, take actions to move around, roll dice, and ultimately try to manage the grid and the enemies and baddies in front of you, slowly eliminating giant hordes of enemies while also taking down the occasional super strong enemy and or running from said super strong enemy, because running from them is an important part of the gameplay, unfortunately, or fortunately, because it adds a degree of tension to the mix. And the game is just satisfying. Its powers and abilities, its variety of systems, variety of scenarios, variety of just characters and heroes. One of the nice things about Marvel Zombies is that every single hero is completely unique. Their abilities that they have are completely unique compared to the shared pool of abilities you'll have if you play Zombicide Black Plague, but each system honestly has strengths to it. I think both Black Plague and Marvel Zombies have a lot of strengths to the way those games operate, but they all come down to the same thing. Put a bunch of miniatures on the board, take control of a bunch of them, use actions every single turn to run around, roll dice, and attack hordes of zombies, and feel powerful as you level up slowly but surely across just a variety of scenarios, and get increasingly more difficult in terms of the complexity, in terms of the intricacy, in terms of the difficulty of them, although it's not a campaign game. There are campaign versions. Undead or Alive is going to have a campaign version you can play through. So does 2nd edition, but again, 2nd edition is way too easy, so I don't really care about that one. But ultimately, I think that the game gives you more of a scenario progression as opposed to an actual campaign. So you play a scenario, you play another scenario. They are linked thematically, but there's no carryover in gameplay. But there's just a ton of good things to say about the system. At the end of the day, Zombicide players tend to fall into three main camps. There's those that like the system, there's those that can't stand the fact that it's as popular as it is, and there's those that just don't care enough. For myself, I was always in the third category until one day I woke up. Like, I didn't care about Zombicide at all. It existed. I knew it existed. I just didn't care. I wasn't into Zombicide. And then one day, I backed Cthulhu Death May Die and started to research more and more other crowdfunding campaigns, including some of the ones that I had missed, and started to realize that Zombicide is something that was tempting to me. I played it. I loved it. And so, here I am. But there are people every single year who are upset that Zombicide is as popular as it is. It's almost like the Call of Duty of board games. It's like, why do people keep buying the same junk year over year and giving Activision their money? Except in this case, CMON is Activision. And the answer is usually, in both cases, because those people are still getting value from that thing. So, bah humbug, and go find something else to be upset about. There's always Blood on the Clock Tower. You can check out my reviews of that if you want something else to be upset about. Anyways, from there we're going to move to my number 22 game of all time, which is going to be, and this one is dropped from last year. This one, I think, I can't remember, was it my top 10 last year? It might have been. I have to double check. But it was high. It might have been 12. It might have been just inside my top 10, just outside my top 10. It was within the top 15 last year. It has dropped to number 22 this year, which means it's a complete horrible pile of plastic, and that is going to be, sorry, it's a heavy box. Oathsworn Into the Deep Wood. Oathsworn Into the Deep Wood is my number 22 game of all time, and make no mistake, this hasn't dropped for any major reason other than the fact that I need to play this one more. When I put this in my top 100 last year, I was actively going through it at the time, and then in the past year, I may have played it once since then. And that's just, I have plans. I have plans to properly play through the entire campaign, but things got pushed out of the way. Effectively, I was playing through Frosthaven and Oathsworn at the same time, and Frosthaven took precedence at the time. Again, granted, Frosthaven is not in my top 100. Oathsworn very much is, and part of that is, you know, playing through as many hours of Gloomhaven, Frosthaven, and Jaws of the Line as I have, which I mentioned previously in other videos. And part of it's just the fact that I do think Oathsworn... Actually, I don't know how Oathsworn would hold up to 150 hours of gameplay, where it would be in my top 100 at that point. I just don't know. I also know that they're not going to put you through 150 hours of gameplay. I mean, you could keep playing it again and again and again, but they give you a more manageable campaign of 20 missions, and that totally changes the way you interact with the game. It's a very interesting separate conversation entirely about the nature of game design, and about the desire to cram as much content into a game as possible, because you want your backers, or buyers, backers, whatever, to go ahead and spend hundreds of dollars in your game, but that also means you need to give them as much content as possible so they get that sense of value. And frankly, sometimes a good 20 mission campaign is going to be far more fulfilling in the long run than forcing someone to play through hundreds of hours to finish your game. And you know what? If they play through that 20 missions of a campaign, they might come back with desire to try new characters and see more things and re-examine and reapproach your game, and or come in for an expansion. Separate conversation. We're going on a long tangent about game design. Let's go back to Oathsworn. Oathsworn, my number 22 game of all time. It's fantastic. It divides the game up into a story mode and then the actual encounter. This is a system that is not uncommon at all. Tenaris Adventures does it. Dante, an upcoming crowdfunding campaign, does it. We have Monster Hunter World does it. Horizon Zero Dawn, Horizon Forbidden West does it. There's a ton of games out there that do that system of breaking up a game into some sort of story progression mode where you journey around and take actions, make choices, manage stuff, and then that has some sort of carryover or consequence into the follow-up game that you're actually playing through. I think it's a good system in general. I think it manages to break up the monotony of either one of those systems on their own, and I like that infrastructure. I do think Oathsworn arguably does it best, although I will say, I mentioned Dante already. I think Dante does a pretty good job too, but we'll talk about that in future videos about Dante. But anyways, going back to Oathsworn over here, it gives you an excellent story mode with a lot of choices and a lot of things that will be affected as you go through it, and then a very engaging story too, as far as sucking you into the world and just having different things going on as far as the different elements of the world, of the story, of what's going on around you as you go through a progression of chasing down various big baddies to take down, because this very much is a boss hunting game. You'll be dealing with, giant enemies to fight off with, and sometimes they'll have little swarms of helpful allies on their end. Other times you'll be facing off just against a big bad. Other times you'll be facing off, I'll actually keep it light to avoid spoilers over here, but there's a bunch of things you'll be facing off against in this game, but meanwhile you're doing so with a card economy system that I do like. This is where I'll give Gloomhaven points. I like the system better in Gloomhaven. There's a full play this, not that, on Gloomhaven versus Oathsworn, with myself, Meg, and Devin going through our thoughts and opinions on all two of those systems from 3 different viewpoints. But ultimately, I think Oathsworn is incredible. I think it is probably better than Gloomhaven on the sum of its parts. It's definitely ranking higher for me right now, but again, some of that is Gloomhaven fatigue. But ultimately, Oathsworn, fantastic game. It is, I believe, just outside the top 100 on Board Game Geek as of the time of this filming. And to be very clear, that doesn't reflect it not being a top 100 game. That reflects its availability. The availability of Oathsworn is lower than many other games, and Gloomhaven's ranking is a combination of ranking and popularity. I think Oathsworn will absolutely be a top 100 game sooner or later. In fact, I think it's likely to make its way into the top 20 games of all time, if I had to make a guess. When the second crowdfunding campaign delivers and a lot more people have the opportunity to rank it and rate it, I think this is going to be a top 20 game of all time over on Board Game Geek. It is well loved, and it's well loved for a reason. Anyways, my number 21, and the last game on this list, is a classic that's been out for quite some time. It ranks incredibly highly on Board Game Geek. I don't remember the exact number, maybe 12, 13. It's high on Board Game Geek. That is going to be A Feast for Odin from Uwe Rosenberg, and arguably my favorite Uwe Rosenberg game. I say arguably because things wax and wane as I play different games. Le Havre in particular is a great game that is not on this top 100, but has been on the top 100 in the past. I just haven't played it in a very long time, and so it's dripped down a bit as far as where my mind is. But Le Havre is excellent, and so are many other Uwe Rosenberg games. But we're not here to talk about those today. We're here to talk about A Feast for Odin, which is a delightful polyomino game that is not your typical weight class for a polyomino game. There's a lot more going on in this experience. In A Feast for Odin, you're going to be playing across 6 or 7 rounds of worker placement. And then what you're going to be doing is you're going to be taking workers, which every single round grows. So you start with 5, then 6, then 7. It keeps growing the number of workers you have every single round. And you're placing them on a ton of spots. I believe it's like 62 unique worker placement spots. There's a lot of worker placement spots on the board, although there's a lot of carryover between them, so it's not that hard to understand. Meanwhile, you're trying to find the best, most optimal combination of, well, everything. Are you going hunting? Are you going whaling? Are you going pillaging? Are you breeding livestock? Are you doing some combination of all 3? And the answer is yes, you're doing some combination of all 4. I said 3 before. 4 things over there. But then that and other things. What are you doing with extra resources? How are you scoring points? Are you filling up your board? Are you filling additional huts? Are you going ahead and gathering various relics? What are all the things you're doing in this game? But it's a ton of worker placement spots with an ever-increasing roster of worker placements available to be placed out. A little bit of RNG in terms of rolling dice for hunting and for pillaging. And the sum of its parts is a game that is absolutely incredible. It's just incredible. I think the expansion as well takes us to the next level. This is a game that has a very solid expansion. The biggest complaint I'd have against it is that this is one of those games where playing it on Board Game Arena versus playing it in person, I'm constantly torn between the two. I like playing it in person, and I like having the expansion. Those are very big pluses for playing it in person. I like playing it on Board Games Arena because I don't have to deal with trying to worry about whether I accidentally flipped my piece from the green to the blue side, and whether I've actually managed it correctly and tracked all those stuff, and the sheer amount of pieces and tokens. Although I will say playing it in person, I do like configuring my board a little bit more than the way it does it on Board Game Arena. Separate conversation. Delightful experience. I think Feast for Odin plays well at 2, it plays well at 3. It slows down a bit at 4, but it is still playable. There's also a solo mode, which to me is more like just practice than anything else. It's not my preferred way to play, but this is a game we are constantly trying to optimize around just how high can you creep up your score. I have seen people say they've gotten over 180 in this game. I don't understand how that's possible, but if you've done that, more power to you. To me, this is a game where I consider anything over 110 points already a great score. I think my highest may have been 140. That's more base game. I've only played the expansion a few times, so that still has room to optimize around it, but that ultimately is going to be A Feast for Odin, a delightful, meaty, worker placement polyomino game from Uwe Rosenberg, and one of the better games out there. Well, I mean, all these games are the better. They're all fantastic. They're all fantastic. What am I supposed to do? Anyways, that is going to be numbers 30 through 21. We have 2 videos left to go, the top 20 games of all time, and they're all great. They're just great games. I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to the rest over here. This is the time of year. Every single, you know what it's like being a content creator? I'm not complaining. I love being a content creator. But you know what it's like being a content creator in the board game space? It's a whole lot of talking about a hobby that you love, but not always getting to talk about the games that you love. I love board games. I love the hobby. I get to experience and see new things. And then every once in a while you have a new game pop up, like Sankore. Well, Sankore over here. I got to play this one. I was excited to share it with you. Talked about it in a review. That's fun. But for every Sankore, there's another 15 reviews I've done of games that I will never play again. They're not even bad games. They're fine. They're good. But they're not where my passion lies. They're just like, hey, I played a game, it's good, and I reviewed it, and there you go, here you go, it's a good game, it really is, it's a genuinely good game. If you buy this, you'll probably have a good time. Is it the thing I love the most? Is it the thing I'm most passionate about? Are they the top games of all time? No, they're not. The top 100 is my favorite time of year, where I get to go ahead and reflect upon the games that really caught my eye. The games that have stood the test of time, and the games that were shiny and good enough that they broke their way into the top 100. It's an exciting time for me. I get to focus on the best of the best that the hobby has to offer. In general, across the year, I'll do top 10 lists. Top 10, two-player games. Top 10 area control games. I will get the opportunity to do so, and those are also fun because, again, they're an opportunity to focus on the best things that the hobby has to offer. If I could give you advice, any advice at all, it would be to not buy games when they come out. Don't buy games right away. Don't watch reviews. Don't watch my reviews. Don't watch other people's reviews. Ignore them entirely. Pay attention to the best of lists. Don't buy every single game that comes out. But, maybe at the end of the year when you're seeing the best games of 2023 and you see 4 games that showed up on 17 people's lists and you realize that those 4 games are universally acclaimed, not universally, but reasonably acclaimed by a lot of people to be very good games, maybe those are the games that you should be hunting down. There's so many games in the industry and so many things. And yes, I will continue to cover them all. I'll continue to cover them so I can continue to say 3.5 out of 5, 3.5 out of 5, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5. Hey, look, there's a 4.5 out of 5, and then look at that. Here's a 5 out of 5 for you. Here's a game I love. And look at that. There's 4 other channels talking about how good this game is. Those are the games you should be getting. There's only so much money to spend in this hobby, and you shouldn't burn yourself out on mediocre games. Make no mistake, if you can afford to and you're enjoying yourself, by all means do so. But before I became a content creator, this is off tangent or whatever, but before I became a content creator, I played a lot of games. I always played a lot of games. But a big difference from then to now is I always played a lot of games, but I usually did so a year or 2 behind the curve. I usually waited till a game had been vetted. That it wasn't just the thing that people were talking about that month in social media, that everyone was like, look, I got this shiny new thing. But rather, it was like, a year after it came out, and people were still excited about it. And it was still hard to track down. It was between print runs. And then I'd pick those games up. I got a lot of good games. Games like Blood Rage, games like Terraforming Mars, like Spirit Island. These are all games I held off on. I held off on at first. And make no mistake, if you jump on the first thing that comes your way, you'll still find great games. But you'll also go through a lot of mediocre games along the way. And so this is my favorite video series every single year. Because it's 100 games every single year that I just don't think you go wrong with any of them. I mean, granted, you'll have your taste, I'll have mine. There is that factor to consider. But at least I'm excited to share every single one of these with you. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co. I appreciate you being here, and as always, I hope you have a good one.